I reached to fix her chest plate, and the alien woman whispered, "Careful." Ethan's boots crunched against the strange, red soil of the alien planet. The sky above was not blue like Earth. It was streaked with violet clouds, and the light was soft, almost unreal. He stopped for a moment to take it in. Everything about this place was different, from the smell in the air to the faint hum of the planet's energy. He had trained for months for this mission, yet nothing could have prepared him for the feeling of stepping onto another world where intelligent life waited. The Lyra were cautious creatures. Tall, with slender, graceful frames and exoskeletons that shimmered faintly in the sunlight, they were not hostile but extremely wary. Any sudden move or loud noise could make them retreat or worse. Ethan had read every report he could find, watched every recorded video of interactions, yet he knew that reading about someone and facing them were two very different things. Today, he was assigned to assist the research team in maintaining their equipment. Most of it was standard scientific gear, monitors, analyzers, and energy regulators. But one unusual system caught his attention: the personal exosuits the Lyra wore. These suits were not just armor, they were life support, communication, and energy regulators all in one. And one of the female Lyra in particular seemed to have a problem with hers. Ethan watched from a distance as she shifted awkwardly, her movements slightly stiff. The chest plate of her exosuit, the most delicate and vital piece of the system, was not locking properly. It was subtle, most humans would not have noticed, but Ethan, trained as an engineer, immediately understood the risk. A misaligned chest plate could cause energy leakage, oxygen disruption, or even injury. He swallowed nervously. Approaching a Lyra directly was risky. They did not speak in the way humans did. Their voices were melodic but low, often more like musical tones than words. Misinterpretation was easy and trust was hard to earn. Still, he could not ignore her struggle. She needed help, and he was the only one trained enough to fix it. "Easy," he muttered to himself, taking a slow step forward. His hands were raised slightly, palms open. In human body language, it was a sign of peace, but he wasn't sure if it translated to the Lyra. He had to rely on his instincts and the minimal guidance from the research team. The Lyra noticed him immediately. Her tall, slender form stiffened. The exosuit's faint glow reflected the sunlight, making her shimmer in shades of silver and blue. She raised her hand slightly, a warning, and tilted her head. Ethan froze. He knew this was the universal sign of caution, maybe even distrust. "Please," he said softly, trying to use calm gestures. He mimicked a slow motion of fixing something, pointing toward the chest plate. His voice was low and gentle, almost blending with the hum of the planet. "I want to help. I won't hurt you." The Lyra's eyes, dark and intense, studied him for a long moment. Ethan felt as if she was weighing every possible outcome in her mind. Then slowly she relaxed her stance, though she did not speak. She simply let him move a step closer, her eyes still locked on him. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He crouched slightly, making himself smaller, less threatening. Every step was careful, deliberate. When he reached the chest plate, he paused. It was unlike any machinery he had worked on before, organic yet mechanical, delicate yet strong. His hands hovered above it, unsure of the best approach. Then came the softest sound he had ever heard from the Lyra. A whisper, barely audible, yet perfectly clear. "Careful," the word sent a shiver down his spine. Not because of fear, but because of the trust implied in that small warning. She was allowing him to touch the most critical part of her body, the core of her exosuit, and yet she warned him to be careful. It was a delicate balance of trust and caution, and Ethan knew that one wrong move could ruin everything. He nodded silently, more to himself than to her. "I understand," he whispered back. He adjusted his grip, moving slowly, gently aligning the chest plate's connectors. His fingers traced the smooth surface, feeling the faint hum of energy coursing beneath. He held his breath, aware that even the slightest pressure in the wrong place could trigger a malfunction. The Lyra watched him closely. Her glowing eyes softened just a fraction, but she remained still. Ethan noticed that the subtle movement of her chest plate had a rhythm, almost like it was alive, reacting to her breath and heartbeat. He had never worked on something so responsive before. Minutes passed like hours. Ethan adjusted a tiny lever, then a latch, checking the alignment again. Every movement was deliberate, careful. He spoke softly, describing what he was doing, even though he wasn't sure if she understood the words. Somehow, the sound of his voice seemed to calm her. The whisper of reassurance was enough to keep the tension from snapping. Finally, he felt the chest plate click into place. The hum of energy stabilized. The soft glow of the exosuit evened out, flowing smoothly along her frame. Ethan exhaled slowly, a weight lifting off his shoulders. He looked up at her, expecting her to react, maybe step back, maybe show some sign of displeasure. Instead, she remained still, but her posture relaxed further. Her eyes, those deep, glimmering orbs, softened just a little more, a sign that the tension had eased. Ethan dared a small smile. It was not much, but it was acknowledgement. He had not failed. "Done," he said softly, stepping back. His hands dropped slowly to his sides, empty and open. The Lyra did not speak. She simply tilted her head slightly, her eyes locking with his for a brief, intense moment. Ethan felt the weight of that gaze. It was more than thanks. It was recognition, respect, and perhaps a fragile spark of trust. Ethan took a step back, giving her more space. He noticed how carefully she moved now, testing the exosuit's adjustments. She flexed her shoulders, turned her torso, and the chest plate remained stable. His work had succeeded. He allowed himself a small sigh of relief. The planet around him was still strange, the air thick and slightly sweet, and the violet clouds above shifted slowly across the sky. But for a moment, none of that mattered. The small victory of understanding and helping someone from a completely different world felt enormous. Yet, even with the repair done, the tension lingered. He knew this was only the beginning. Building trust with the Lyra was not a single act. It was a process, one that required patience, observation, and careful action at every step. One mistake could undo hours of effort. The alien woman finally moved closer, her steps deliberate, precise. She reached out, not in aggression, but in a gesture Ethan did not fully understand. He froze, unsure if this was safe. Then she brushed a finger lightly along the edge of the chest plate, a gesture of approval or perhaps curiosity. Ethan allowed himself another small smile. This moment, simple as it was, meant everything. It meant that she trusted him enough to approach him, to let him be close. In a world where every action was scrutinized, where the line between help and harm was thin, this was progress. He straightened, brushing some dust from his uniform. "You're okay," he murmured, though he knew she might not understand the words. But words were not needed entirely. The gesture, the shared understanding of the repair, spoke more than language ever could. As he stepped back, he glanced at the horizon. The planet stretched endlessly, full of unknown dangers and unknown wonders. And somewhere out there, other Lyra watched him, curious and cautious, like she had been. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Today he had succeeded in a small way. He had reached out and she had allowed him to help. That was no small thing in a world where trust was fragile and lives depended on precision. Ethan took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "Careful, yes, always careful." And somewhere in the soft glow of her eyes, he thought he saw the faintest acknowledgement. Not words, not sounds, just a quiet mutual understanding that this was the beginning of something delicate, important, and entirely human. No, entirely real. The alien woman, Ethan had learned her name, was Lyria from the research team, stood still for a long moment after the repair. The subtle glow of her exosuit pulsed steadily, the chest plate functioning perfectly now. Ethan could feel the relief washing over him, but he also knew that trust, once earned, had to be maintained carefully. One misstep could undo all the progress. Lyria's eyes, dark and deep, studied him. There was no fear now, only cautious observation. She tilted her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, and Ethan realized she was testing him, testing whether his calm approach and careful hands were consistent. He nodded to himself and took another measured step forward. "I want to understand your suit better," he said softly, keeping his voice low and steady. "If I understand it, I can help you more safely." Lyria watched, but made no move. Then, almost imperceptibly, she extended her hand. It was a gesture not of trust, but of permission, a small step, yet enormous in meaning. Ethan lowered himself to her level, careful not to make sudden movements. He extended a hand to touch the edge of the chest plate again, gently this time, feeling the soft, subtle hum of the energy flowing through it. She did not pull away. Instead, she guided his hand slightly, showing him a hidden latch and a secondary connector. Ethan studied it carefully, his fingers tracing the lines as he nodded to himself. Her patience was remarkable. Even though she could have withdrawn or refused, she let him learn, let him adjust, and let him earn her confidence step by step. As the minutes passed, a rhythm formed between them. Ethan made a small adjustment here, Lyria observed. He pointed at a lever there and she followed his motion. There was no rush, no panic, only mutual understanding. In this quiet exchange, Ethan realized that the moment they shared was more than just a technical repair. It was a connection, a bond forged in patience, trust, and respect. Finally, Ethan took a cautious step back. "All done," he said softly, almost as if saying it too loudly might break the fragile balance between them. He watched her movements as she flexed her shoulders, bent slightly, and rotated her torso. The chest plate stayed firmly in place. Everything worked. Lyria's eyes softened, and for the first time Ethan thought he saw a glimmer of something like approval. Not words, she did not speak, but a simple acknowledgement, quiet and personal. She had trusted him enough to let him touch her suit again, and he had not failed. The research team, observing from a distance, stayed silent, understanding that this was a delicate first contact moment. Any sudden action could disturb the fragile trust being built. Ethan felt a quiet pride, but he also felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. He knew that their interaction would set the tone for all future engagements. Ethan took a deep breath and decided to push the connection further, carefully. "Can you show me how it feels when it works properly?" he asked, gesturing toward the chest plate. He spoke slowly, using minimal words, relying on tone and gesture. Lyria hesitated, then stepped forward. She moved gracefully, letting Ethan observe the subtle way the chest plate adjusted with her movements. She demonstrated how energy flowed through the suit, how the connectors shifted, and how the system responded to her body. Every motion was precise, controlled, and deliberate. Ethan watched closely, fascinated. "This is amazing," he whispered to himself. He had seen technology, even complex alien technology, but nothing like this. It was alive in a way, responsive not just to commands, but to instinct, movement, and intention. And it was all tied to her trust, her willingness to allow him close enough to learn. Over the next hour, they worked together, each learning from the other. Ethan carefully made small adjustments, improving the efficiency of the suit without touching anything vital. Lyria responded to each move, subtly signaling approval or adjustment. It was a silent conversation, a dance of understanding. During a pause, Ethan dared a small smile. Lyria looked at him, tilted her head slightly, and for a fraction of a second the stiffness in her posture relaxed. Ethan realized that she had accepted him, not fully, not yet, but enough to allow cooperation and learning. This was progress. As the sun of the alien planet dipped lower in the sky, casting violet and orange streaks across the landscape, Ethan stepped back and looked at her. "You're ready," he said softly, not because the suit was perfect, but because trust had been established, the most important part. Lyria remained still for a moment, then moved closer, extending a delicate hand, not toward him directly, but toward a small console nearby. She pressed a few buttons, demonstrating how her suit could regulate environmental conditions and energy flow. Ethan followed, observing and learning. They were no longer just human and alien, they were a team. A small breeze stirred the red soil around them, carrying a faint scent that reminded Ethan vaguely of spices from Earth. Lyria tilted her head, as if noticing it too. For a moment they shared a quiet connection to the world around them, separate from the task at hand. It was peaceful yet tense, the tension of understanding, of learning, of trust being forged in real time. Finally, Ethan dared to speak again. "I know this is unusual," he said, voice low, careful, "but thank you." Lyria's eyes met his, and she tilted her head in what could only be described as a nod. It was subtle, but the meaning was clear. Acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps a quiet form of gratitude. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him. This was the reward for patience, care, and attention to detail, not just fixing a machine, but building a bridge between two very different lives. The research team stepped closer, sensing that the critical first contact had succeeded. One of them quietly spoke, suggesting they prepare to move to the next task. Ethan nodded, but he stayed for a moment longer, watching Lyria adjust her chest plate, testing its stability and observing the hum of energy flow. Everything was working perfectly. As he finally stepped back, preparing to leave, Ethan felt a subtle shift in the air. Lyria had not moved away. Instead, she allowed him to be near. That small gesture, simple as it seemed, meant everything. It was trust, mutual understanding, and recognition of effort. Before leaving, Ethan whispered almost to himself, "Careful, always careful." He remembered her words, the first sign of trust, and realized that it was not just about fixing the suit, it was about respecting the life within it. Lyria watched him one last time as he walked back toward the research team. There was no dramatic farewell, no words exchanged. Just a glance, a quiet acknowledgement of a shared experience, and the understanding that this was only the beginning. The sun set fully behind the violet clouds, painting the sky with colors Ethan had never seen on Earth. He felt the weight of accomplishment, but also the responsibility of what lay ahead. Building trust with the Lyra was a continuous task, one that required patience, empathy, and constant care. Today had been a small step, yet a significant one. As the research team prepared to move to another site, Ethan glanced back at Lyria. She stood tall, her exosuit glowing softly, the chest plate functioning perfectly. For a brief moment she seemed almost human, not in appearance but in the subtle expression of acknowledgement, respect, and quiet understanding. Ethan smiled softly. He knew that tomorrow, the day after, and the days beyond would require the same careful attention, the same patience, and the same respect. But for today, the repair was successful, the connection had begun, and trust, fragile as it was, had taken its first step. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan realized that this was what made him a true engineer. Not just the ability to fix machines, but the ability to navigate trust, respect, and understanding in ways that no manual or training could teach. The alien planet was quiet now, save for the gentle hum of life and energy around them. Lyria watched him go, her posture relaxed, her eyes calm. Ethan knew that their paths would cross again, that the bond they had begun would grow stronger. And he knew, without a doubt, that he had earned something far greater than a simple repair. He had earned a chance to understand, to connect, and to respect life in a way he had never imagined. The next morning, the planet's sky was a soft lavender, the violet clouds shifting slowly across the horizon. Ethan awoke in his small habitat module, the events of the previous day running through his mind again and again. Every moment with Lyria had been tense, delicate, yet profoundly moving. He understood that helping her had been more than just a mechanical task. It had been an exercise in patience, trust, and understanding. He dressed quickly, checking his tools and equipment. Today, he would observe Lyria more closely, hoping to learn how her exosuit functioned during movement and daily activity. The research team had suggested that watching her adapt naturally would provide important data, but Ethan knew this was more than data. It was a continuation of the fragile connection they had begun. As he stepped out onto the alien soil, the familiar hum of life filled the air. Lyria was already outside, standing near the rocky outcrop that served as her practice area. Her movements were fluid and precise, the chest plate now perfectly aligned. She paused when she noticed Ethan approaching, her eyes locking with his. There was no fear, only cautious awareness. Ethan approached slowly, his hands raised slightly in the universal sign of peace. "Good morning," he said softly. Though she might not understand his words, the tone was gentle, calm, and meant to convey respect. Lyria inclined her head in acknowledgement. Her posture suggested readiness but not threat. Ethan remembered the whisper from yesterday. Careful, that word had stayed with him, reminding him that every interaction required mindfulness. Today, they would go further than repair. He needed to observe how the exosuit functioned during extended movement, and more importantly, how Lyria responded to him being present so close. It was a test of mutual understanding, patience, and unspoken trust. As they began, Ethan noted her subtle gestures, how she shifted weight, how her chest plate adjusted with her breathing, and how energy flowed across the exosuit. Each movement was a language of its own. He followed carefully, making notes silently, never touching unless she permitted. Lyria paused and glanced at him. Ethan stopped immediately, respecting her unspoken instruction. She took a small step closer and demonstrated a slight adjustment to her chest plate, a complex motion that required perfect alignment. Ethan watched intently, recognizing the delicate precision required. "You careful," he whispered softly to himself, echoing her words from yesterday. Minutes passed, stretching into an hour. The rhythm between them deepened. Each movement, each gesture was a silent conversation. Ethan began to understand her subtle signs. A tilt of the head meant observation, a shift of the shoulders indicated readiness, and the soft glow of her exosuit's energy flow reflected her comfort or alertness. At one point, a small gust of wind kicked up the red soil. Lyria's posture stiffened instinctively, as if preparing for an unseen threat. Ethan froze, waiting, holding his hands up, motionless. She relaxed almost immediately, a quiet acknowledgement that his presence was safe. This small exchange, unnoticed by anyone else, strengthened the fragile bond. After some time, Ethan spoke softly, choosing words carefully. "If we try something new, it might be easier for you." He gestured toward a rocky slope nearby. Lyria's eyes studied him, her gaze sharp but not hostile. Slowly, she moved toward the slope, allowing him to follow. The slope was gentle, yet challenging for someone wearing an exosuit. Lyria moved with grace, adjusting her chest plate at precise moments, her steps deliberate. Ethan observed carefully, taking notes on every adjustment, every subtle shift. When he offered a small tool to help with a fine alignment, she hesitated, then allowed him to make a tiny adjustment. His hands were steady, deliberate, cautious. For the first time, Ethan felt a profound connection, not through words, not through gestures alone, but through shared understanding. They were two beings from completely different worlds, communicating silently, bridging the gap with patience and careful observation. After the slope exercise, Lyria rested, allowing the suit to recalibrate its systems. Ethan stepped closer, maintaining a safe distance. He wanted to ensure the chest plate remained stable. She did not move away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, a gesture that seemed to say, "I trust you for now." "Your suit works perfectly now," Ethan whispered softly. Again, she did not respond with words. But her eyes met his, steady and calm, conveying acknowledgement and perhaps a hint of respect. Ethan realized that words were unnecessary. Trust and understanding could exist silently, quietly, and profoundly. As the day passed, Ethan continued to assist Lyria with minor adjustments, each time more natural than the last. The fear and tension that had characterized their first encounter had eased, replaced with a rhythm of cooperation. He noticed that she even anticipated his movements now, adjusting subtly before he could act. It was a silent form of teamwork, almost like a dance. During a brief pause, Ethan stepped back and watched her move. The sunlight caught the edges of her exosuit, creating a subtle shimmer. He realized that this was more than a machine. This was a living extension of her body. Every adjustment mattered, every touch required thought, and every interaction demanded respect. He felt a swell of pride, not in his technical skill, but in the mutual respect they had established. This was what true collaboration looked like, not forced obedience or simple repair, but genuine understanding and trust. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the red soil, Ethan prepared to leave the practice area. Lyria stood still, her chest plate humming softly, eyes fixed on him. He paused, aware of the unspoken communication between them. "Thank you," he whispered once more. Not for the repair, not even for her cooperation, but for allowing him into this shared space, for letting him witness and be part of something extraordinary. Lyria tilted her head, a small gesture, yet filled with meaning. It was acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps a silent promise that their connection was not fleeting. Ethan understood that this moment, small as it seemed, was more significant than any technical achievement. Before leaving, he knelt slightly and touched a small panel near the chest plate, not on her body, but on the edge of the suit, to indicate respect and understanding. Lyria observed, then mimicked the motion in a way that was entirely her own. It was playful, subtle, yet filled with recognition. The research team, watching from a distance, had remained silent. They understood that this interaction was beyond data collection. It was a bridge between species, built on patience, care, and mutual respect. Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction. Today had been more than a technical success. It had been a human moment, a real connection that could not be measured in charts or graphs. As he returned to the habitat module, Ethan looked back at Lyria. She was adjusting her chest plate one last time, the soft glow of her suit reflecting the fading sunlight. He knew their paths would cross again, that tomorrow would bring new tasks and new lessons. But he also knew that trust, once earned, could never be taken lightly. Inside, he reflected on the lessons of the day. Patience had been key. Observation and understanding had been essential, and most of all, respect had been the foundation of their interaction. This was what made him a true engineer, a true collaborator. Not just the ability to fix what was broken, but the ability to navigate the delicate balance of trust, empathy, and care. That night, as he drifted into sleep, he thought of Lyria's whisper from their first encounter. Careful. It had guided him throughout the day, a quiet reminder that connection required mindfulness, that every action mattered. And in that thought, he realized something profound. Trust was fragile, but when nurtured with care, it could grow into something remarkable. The alien planet was quiet now, bathed in soft violet moonlight. Ethan knew that tomorrow would bring challenges, but he felt ready. With patience, attention, and respect, he could navigate this new world. And perhaps, in time, he could build not just a professional connection, but a genuine understanding, a bond that bridged the distance between two very different lives. For now, he allowed himself to rest, knowing that the chest plate he had repaired was not just a piece of technology. It was a symbol of trust, cooperation, and the quiet power of careful, thoughtful action. And somewhere, in the gentle hum of her exosuit, he imagined Lyria acknowledging the unspoken bond they had formed, a connection that went beyond words and would last far longer than any repair. The next morning, The pale lavender light of the alien sun spilled across the rocky landscape. Ethan stepped out of his habitat module, carrying his tool kit and a small notebook. Today was different. Yesterday had been about repair and trust. Today would be about understanding Lyria's world. Ethan had noticed small patterns in her behavior, how she adjusted her chest plate depending on movement, how she paused at certain sounds, even how her eyes followed energy fluctuations around the area. Each detail seemed minor, but for Lyria, they were crucial to survival and efficiency. Observing and understanding them could prevent mistakes and deepen their connection. Lyria was already outside, standing near a slope that overlooked a shallow valley. The soft hum of her exosuit echoed through the quiet air. Ethan approached slowly, hands raised slightly, and gave a small nod in greeting. Lyria's eyes followed him carefully. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture Ethan had come to recognize as acknowledgement without full approval. "Today, I want to learn," Ethan said softly. "Not just your suit, but your world." Lyria's gaze flickered toward the valley, then back at him. She did not respond verbally, but the faint tilt of her head suggested she understood. Ethan understood that communication with her would be slow, deliberate, and reliant on observation, gesture, and patience. He stepped closer, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "I will follow your lead," he said. "You show me, I learn." For a moment Lyria considered him, eyes sharp and calculating. Then, in a motion almost imperceptible, she turned and began moving down the slope. Ethan followed at a careful distance, watching every step she took. The slope was uneven, filled with loose rocks and red soil. Lyria's movements were graceful, her chest plate adjusting automatically, absorbing the minor jolts of each step. Ethan observed closely. He noticed how the energy lines of her exosuit shifted with every movement, how the connectors on the chest plate flexed just enough to maintain stability. She moved in a rhythm, one that felt natural to her but seemed almost like a dance to him. After several minutes, she stopped at a small plateau overlooking a cluster of glowing plants. The soft light from the flora illuminated her exosuit, making the colors shimmer beautifully. Ethan knelt slightly to examine the chest plate without touching it, noting how it adapted to her stance and the ambient energy. She did not rush, did not make sudden movements. Instead, she watched him, as if gauging his understanding. Ethan nodded silently, careful to move only when she indicated. It was a delicate balance, too fast and he might startle her, too slow and the moment could pass. Ethan finally spoke softly. "Your suit, it reacts to more than movement. It feels the environment." Lyria tilted her head slightly. She did not need words. Her gesture confirmed his observation. The chest plate, the exosuit, was connected to her senses, adapting to wind, temperature, and even faint vibrations in the ground. It was a living system, responsive to her body and the world around her. They continued their exploration, moving down into the valley. Ethan followed her lead, observing how she navigated small obstacles, how the suit compensated for uneven ground, and how subtle shifts in her posture affected energy flow. Every detail mattered. After some time, Lyria paused near a small stream of glowing water. The liquid seemed alive, moving with a rhythm that mirrored the pulse of the planet itself. She knelt and touched the edge of the stream, letting her fingers hover above it without disturbing the flow. Ethan watched in fascination. He had never seen anything like it. The Lyra's connection to their environment was profound. It was not just physical, it was intuitive. The suit amplified this connection, allowing her to move seamlessly through a world that would be dangerous for any human. Ethan took careful notes, sketching diagrams of the chest plate adjustments, the energy flows, and the subtle movements she made. Every observation felt like a lesson in patience, respect, and understanding. Lyria watched him work. At one point, she moved closer, allowing him to examine a small adjustment panel on the side of her chest plate. Her hand hovered nearby, not touching but close enough that he felt her trust. Ethan adjusted a small lever, careful not to disrupt the system. The suit responded perfectly, energy flows stabilizing. For a brief moment, they stood side by side, silent and focused. The only sounds were the soft hum of her suit and the gentle rustle of the alien flora. Ethan realized that this quiet cooperation was more significant than any words. Trust had grown, layer by layer, through careful observation, patience, and respect. As the sun rose higher, casting sharper light on the valley, Ethan asked softly, "Can you show me how you protect yourself if something goes wrong?" Lyria considered him, then slowly demonstrated a series of movements designed to stabilize her energy field and maintain balance in case of sudden disruption. Ethan observed every motion, noting the precise adjustments of her chest plate and exosuit. The display was fluid, efficient, and entirely natural to her. When she finished, she stepped back, watching him carefully. Ethan nodded, appreciating the demonstration. He understood that this was not just about safety, it was about trust. She was allowing him to see her techniques, her methods, without fear or hesitation. Ethan spent the rest of the day learning from Lyria. He asked no questions that might startle her. He moved only when she indicated. He respected the pace, the rhythm, and the delicate balance of their interaction. As the alien sun dipped toward the horizon, casting violet and gold streaks across the valley, Ethan stepped back and observed Lyria from a short distance. She adjusted her chest plate one last time, testing the system, and then turned to face him. For a long moment their eyes met. Ethan felt something profound in that silent connection, a bond that had grown from careful repair, observation, and mutual respect. He realized that the moment was more than a technical achievement. It was a bridge between two worlds, two lives, built on patience, understanding, and trust. "Tomorrow," Ethan said softly, "we will continue. I will follow your lead." Lyria inclined her head, a subtle nod that spoke more than words could. The acknowledgement was clear. She accepted his presence, his care, and his patience. As Ethan returned to the habitat module, he reflected on the lessons of the day. Learning from Lyria had been more than an exercise in observation. It had been a lesson in respect, patience, and the quiet art of understanding. Every motion, every gesture, every hum of her suit had taught him something about life, connection, and trust. That night, as he wrote in his notebook, Ethan thought about the day's experiences. He realized that technical skill alone was not enough. Understanding, empathy, and patience were just as important, if not more so. Lyria had shown him the depth of connection possible when respect and care guided every action. The alien planet was quiet under the soft glow of twin moons. Ethan's thoughts returned to Lyria's whispered warning from their first encounter. Careful. He understood now that it was not just a caution, it was guidance, a principle for interaction, a reminder that every action, every gesture mattered. Ethan closed his notebook and leaned back, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. Today had been another step forward. Trust had grown, understanding had deepened, and a silent bond had strengthened. He knew tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and perhaps new opportunities to deepen their connection. But he felt ready. With patience, observation, and respect, he could navigate this alien world, learn from it, and grow. And through it all, he would remember the quiet words that had guided him. Careful. Lyria, somewhere in the valley, stood watching the soft movement of the planet around her. Her chest plate hummed quietly, energy flowing steadily. She had allowed him into her world, step by step, and in doing so had formed a bond that went beyond words. It was mutual respect, trust, and understanding, a connection between two very different lives that had begun quietly, carefully, and would continue to grow. Ethan finally returned to his habitat, looking back at the glowing valley one last time. He smiled softly. The repair, the observation, and the quiet cooperation had done more than stabilize a chest plate. They had begun a story of understanding, of shared experience, and of respect. And in the quiet hum of her suit, he could almost feel the acknowledgement of a bond that would last far longer than any single mission, far beyond the confines of this alien planet.